welcome to session number 2. Seeing some new faces, some old faces. It's good to see you all. Hope you're excited for another hour of fun. I did shave Rainbow Rhythms. Oh yeah, I'll turn it up a bit. Check. Might be a bit of noise, but that's alright. Oh, I think that's alright. If I do it any louder, I think we're going to get a annoying noise floor. Alright, so just before we get started, I just want to say Ableton, it's very complicated. It's very deep and you can get very technical, but I suggest that you keep it simple as you possibly can. Even just for the first month or so, while you get to understand, the basics really well. I think that's really crucial. Another thing is you're going to have bad days. You're going to have days when you open up Ableton and you're trying out lots of different things and it just doesn't work. Don't worry about it. If everyone showed everyone else their process and the music they made in order to get to something they liked, there would be a lot of stuff out there. So don't worry if you have a bad day. Someday you'll have a good day. Some days you will have a good day. Anyway, the main thing is just make sure you have fun. All right. So to keep things simple, we're going to use the same samples that we used last week. There's just 3 of them. So just looking over here where I've added a folder, which we did last week. I've got the breakbeat, kick pattern, and the wood block loop. Now last week we just dragged them in and we looped them. We also adjusted the lengths of the loops and we had to play around. We ended up with something that sounded a bit like this. And yeah, it was quite a fun exercise. So just pressing stop again, stop everything. We remembered tab, of course, is very useful to change views. Spacebar is useful. Anyway, we're going to go into some depth about samples and other ways that we can use them. We're going to go over here and we're going to go to instruments. The first thing we're going to try out is the drum rack. Drum rack will click and drag next to our last channel and load it in. As you'll see, it is a MIDI object, so it kind of looks the same as this one, the drum kit. So essentially what we can do is we can load samples into every single one of these squares, and as you can see there's about 100 of them. So that's pretty crazy, but yeah, for now we're just going to use one sample multiple times and see what we can do with it. So I'm just going to hit the arm button on the channel, which is this little circle down the bottom. And if you remember last week, we were using the computer MIDI keyboard. It was unticked again. Glad I checked. I'm just going to press A on my keyboard and see where it comes up on the drum rack. Yep. So it's coming up there. Cool. So when I hit when I hit A on the keyboard, it's going to trigger a sample that's on that spot. So let's load up a sample into it. Okay, we got this one, kick pattern. Let's bring it in. So click and drag. Also, at any point, if you're finding things too fast, just put a comment in the chat box and we'll get to it. There's a slight delay, but it will be tended to. Okay, so as you can see, it's a waveform. You know all about the waveforms, which is great. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to press A again. It plays the sample. Make this a tiny bit louder. Cool. So we only want one part of this sample. We just want the first kick. So we're going to click and drag this little flag arrow thing, clicking and dragging, and just going to have the first part. That's a kick. So I'm going to press A again. Now we just got a nice kick. Gonna make it a little louder. So you've got volume and you've got volume velocity. So velocity is a very useful tool. We'll get into that a bit later. But yeah, the main volume is the one on the right. So now when we click A, we've got a kick. A kind of interesting sounding kick. Maybe we'll transpose it so we can adjust it by semitones. I'm going to go up, click and drag to 10. So it kind of sounds a bit like a weird tom drum. If we click and drag and go down, it's like a deeper kick, which is nice. Cool. So when this sample plays in the drum rack, it basically just plays the whole sample. It's in one shot mode, so I'm just going to leave it in that. We're going to get into slice later, which is really cool, but right now it's just one shot. So we want a little bit of a fade out on this sample, so when the sample hits, you're not just letting it all play and cut off, because you're going to get pops and clicks. So when you have audio playing, and if it just plays and then stops without any kind of fade out, you're going to get clicks and pops. That also includes the start of samples, but I think you're going to notice it more at the end. So to rectify this problem, we're going to just look at this sample. We're going to go down to fade out, and I'm going to click and hold and drag it, and you're going to see as I do that, there becomes a fade out. So you can hear. So that's with the fade out. I'll make it very obvious. And then with. So this sample, it kind of fades out a bit naturally, so you're not going to get a really harsh click. However, you're going to want to fade out on your samples. You can actually use it creatively as well. I'll show you how to later. But yeah, so I've got a kick on A if we hit the keyboard. So let's get that same sample and create a different sound that we can use. So hitting S on the keyboard, I can see it's over here, D3. I'm going to click and drag that in. So maybe we'll take another part of the loop. Let's take, this bit looks interesting. So if you, everyone's all good, I hope. If you click and drag up and down, you can actually zoom in, which is really handy. So I'm just going to get to the start of that sample, hit S. Oh, we forgot to cut off the end. Let's do that. click and drag. There we go. There's probably some nice detail in this as it fades out, so sounds okay. As before, I'm gonna transpose it. That's cool. Bit zappy. Bring it down, bring it up. That sounds good. We can hit A and S, see how they work together. Okay, I'm gonna fade it out again. I'm gonna fade this one in as well. As you can see, instead of starting at the end, starts at the beginning. So it's got a bit of a, that's called attack. Attack is how fast the sample, well, how much time it takes for the sample to be full amplitude, full volume. So that's really useful. The other way is called release, and there are other things, but I'm not going to get too technical. So we've got a little fade in. See how that sounds. It's like it's very quiet because we've taken out the loudest section. So we're going to just turn up the volume a bit, not too much. So it's kind of strange, sort of zappy percussion sound. On its own, it's okay, but maybe we could put it into a loop and see how it goes. How is everyone holding up? Doing okay, I hope? Okay. So, cool, that's looking good. All right, we're going to go back up to the drum rack because it is a MIDI object. We're going to double click like we have in the past. And now we can write in when the samples will play. So this is where I get to something that I wanted to say. Didn't know when I was going to say it. It's going to be now. We don't know the difference between these two because they're both called kick pattern. So what we want to do is we want to double click back into drum rack. We get there at the top, double click. This one's a kick, so I'll right click, rename. Gonna call it kick, very original. I'm gonna call this one zap. It's kind of like a zap. So here we go. Right click, rename. Very useful, and I recommend renaming everything as you go because projects get very dense very quickly. You'll end up with layers of things with random names, and I really recommend organization is very important but not essential in Ableton. Okay, going to double click. Now we've got kick and zap. Great. Just gonna pop it on the one, kick, kick, kick. To add it in, you just double click it to delete it. I'm gonna put the zap on the off. There we go. Let's see how that sounds. Pretty average. But now we've got a looping. We can double click, play around with some of these parameters until we get something that we like. I'm going to make this really zappy. Get rid of the fade out and the fade in. Give it a slight fade out. So now it's a, it's very minuscule, but it's a nice sound created out of a loop, sounds completely different to our loop. We can, sounds kind of cool. Experiment. That's where this gets exciting, when you chuck in samples, cut them, stretch them, do whatever. Anyway, cool. That is a very simplified version of the drum rack. So there are a few other ways to work with your samples. Drum rack is the best for stuff that's, you know, you're not going to change too much. You don't want to change the pitch around, like playing it on a keyboard, like I've shown how you play samples in the past. Okay, so let's now, we've done the drum rack, we've put our samples in, we've just clicked and dragged, we've renamed them. If you're playing them, you're wondering what these things are. This is mute. So when you click it, it'll just mute the sound. And on the other side, we have solo. So it speaks for itself. It's very useful when you're playing around with, 10 or 15 samples and you just want to hear some variation, and, it's a good tool for experimentation. Cool. So, just going to pause that. Same with renaming. You can just right click, rename. So, cool drums. You might have like a live drum kit or drum machine. Rename it, whatever you want. Sometimes it's fun to just make up, nonsense. Okay, so back over to instruments. Now we're going to introduce simpler. So same with the drum rack. We're going to click and drag. We're going to bring it over here. We're going to drop it. Cool. Double click. Now, you're seeing probably very similar parameters. They are very similar. However, they are slightly different because you're just using one sample, and when you play it on the keyboard or the keyboard, the computer MIDI keyboard, it's going to change pitch. So that's really cool. Alright, but for this example, I'm going to go to our 3 samples in the browser window. We're going to get that breakbeat we used last week. I'm going to click and drag, going to bring it in. Okay. And I didn't mention before, or maybe I did, just make sure you're on slice mode. Now, what slice does that is really cool is it takes your loop, your waveform, and it detects where sounds are. It does quite a good job. Clicking and dragging to zoom in, you can see it's missed a bit, but you can just click and drag, fix it up. Easy. Now, what this does, if you click the arm button again, it plays samples cut into pieces. So at the moment, it's not playing when I press. Wondering why that is? That could be because I need to go up or down octaves. If you remember using the keyboard, you press Z and X. So what I'm doing, I'm just pressing X and Z until, there we go. So what happened there is, there we go, A. I'm going to double click into, sorry, wrong one. This one, no, it's not that one. Doesn't matter. It's actually this one if you double click and make a box. So just scrolling down and I'm looking, so C1, the start of the sample plays at C1. Sorry if that was a little confusing. So as you go up the keyboard, it's going to play sections that have been chosen, which is really useful and really cool. Still not getting sound there. Oh yes, so what you need to do is you need to double click, make a box, press the keyboards. So Z and X goes, I'm gonna click and drag this. So Z and X, if you hit them, they go up and down octaves. This is a little confusing, so I'll go slow. So what you need to do is go into a loop. You click and drag the piano roll so you can see a fair bit. You just go left to right and it will change size. So I'm hitting A. So there it is there. I want to get down to C1. So to go down 1 octave, we press Z. I press that once. So there we go. It's playing part of the sample, but I want to go down 1 more, hitting Z again, then A. So that's C1 is where the simpler slicer starts. Cool, awesome. So there's a lot of samples here. We don't really need that many. So to change how many there are, what you want to do is, I'm glad it blew your mind. That's what we're here for, blowing minds. So click and drag on sensitivity and you'll see as I bring it down, it just slices up a lot smaller. But you're hearing more of that loop. So I'm just hitting A and getting a nice zone. So hey, I want to, let's see. So I'm going to drag that, click and drag. So I'm hitting S. So there we go. S is a snare. So that's what I'm just explaining. So when you use slice, by default, the sample slices. This is just in simpler. Go to slice mode, and when you put in your sample, the sample is going to start on C1. Version 9, I think, possibly doesn't have this feature. So I won't go into too much detail. It's on the menu on the left hand within simpler. Yeah, so I'm really sorry for those using, oh, okay. So apparently it does. I'm glad. So that was rather confusing, but I think we got there. So we're going to cut this up in more detail later, but let's give each little sample a fade out. So what we got? Anyway, this is where the fun happens. So double click now, C1. It's annoying that you can't, find out what sample's playing, but I guess that's, part of the charm, mystery. So I'm going to play that. Cool. That's like a kick with some hi-hat information. Oh yeah, there we go. Oh, why isn't it playing? Because it is in monophonic mode. So monophonic means that one sample and only one sample can play. So we don't want that. We want to, or maybe you do, but in my case, I don't. So I clicked back into the sample, gone to the breakbeat. I've changed it to poly. So, you know, you've got 6 sounds that can play at the same time. Cool. So, I'm just going to write in something really quick. Just winging it. I don't know what's going on. I'm just... You can't see the slice menu. Okay. Make sure when you're in instruments, you're using simpler, not sampler. That could be it. I'm wondering why that might be. Well, perhaps I should move on. But check it's simpler. Double click. Slice. It should all be here. Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah, make sure it's simpler. So this is sounding pretty cool. It actually sounds like Benita Applebum. So, alright. So, that is time's moving on, so I'm going to leave it at that. But, yeah. What you can do while that's playing is you can play around with sensitivity. I'm going to just... Whoa, see. Put it back to mono, see what it sounds like. You know, might take a while, but cool. And also you can transpose it. I want to get that snare back, so I'm going to change that to 0. I hope everyone's following. It's slightly more complicated than last week. Let's get this sounding a bit better before we move on. You can hear those clicks, that's because there's no fade out. So if you add a bit of a fade out, there are the click. If you should be able to hear the clicks I was talking about. So yeah, okay. So the third, there are lots of variations on samplers, but the third I'll show is the sampler. So I need to make a new track, so I might need some space. Just make sure this thing's here. Drop files and devices. You just got to scroll across. There is, yes. So Transpose adjusts samples by semitones. So if you imagine on a keyboard, it's moving one note, including the black notes. Yeah, so Transpose is transposing per semitone for samples. Okay, so sampler, clicking and dragging. Cool. So same kind of thing, few different options, quite a few options actually. So just stop that, go back to samples. Okay, is everyone following so far? I'm going to assume yes. So, for the sampler, we are going to take woodblock loop, drag it in, and as per usual, I'm going to take the little flag up the end and click and drag, scroll down, and there we go. I'm just going to use this sample. Now, to hear it, I'm just going to arm it. Oh, that's quite deep. XX, go up. So, this is quite cool. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to play 3 keyboard notes and create like a weird woodblock chord. I can do it again, but are you talking about the sampler? Let's just go from the start. So I'll delete this. Boop. We'll go instruments, sampler, click and drag, drop there. Cool. Double click into sampler and go down to our folder. Drag in the woodblock loop. Click and drag from the end. There we go. I'm just going to take the first part. There we go. And I'm going to arm it. With C1, it's different because the sample is being pitched across the whole keyboard. So if you double click and make a little MIDI block, you can, I'll just find where this is. So scrolling, where is it? You should be able to find a little red dot. There we go. See, that's quite high. Going ZZZ. It's going down ZZZ. See, it's C1. You can go lower. There we go. See, it's cool. Sweet. Okay, so just going get something that sounds nice. Play our breakbeat. And so I hope you remember from last week, I'm just going to click record. Very crass playing. Just going to, so to select everything, I've got a bit ahead of myself there. I've hit Command A. That's selected all my notes. I'm just going to bring them in to somewhere that works. I'm going to click and drag the tail, the top tail, which is the loop. And I'm going to play this. So that's pretty crass, but yeah, I'm just going to delete that one for fun. Cool. So, you know, you can, like last week, hold highlight, hold shift, go up. So go up an octave. You can play around. This is a sample of like a wood block, so pitch, you know, doesn't really matter at the moment. Just getting something that sounds interesting. Cool. So I think that sounds cool. I'm just highlighting and deleting and highlighting and copying and pasting and just moving things around. Cool. Okay. So I'm sure you can go back all over all of that and play around with samples, but for now we're going to move in to the world of effects. This is how you really change up your sample. This is like sculpting the sound. We've put it on the table. Now we're just gonna like make it into something that we really like. Okay. So I've double clicked into woodblock. Going to go over to audio effects, and I'm going to use this now. EQ8 is like a workhorse. You're going to use that in possibly every single track you use, like every channel. EQing is like very, very basic sound design. It's very, very important, and you can just get so much out of samples, recordings, virtual synths, everything. You are controlling how a sound sounds with EQ8. Okay, so I'm going to click and drag, drop it onto woodblock. So I just dropped it on the top, but you can click and I'll just delete it just to show you again. You can click and drag into this spot as well. Cool. So just checking everyone is doing okay out there. Hope you're all following. It's quite busy this week, but there's a lot to go back on. So we've gone through the drum rack with this. We've gone through the simpler, and we've broken up a sample with the slicer. So I'll just go through that again. The slicer. And we've used the sampler. And so the sampler is pitching the sample as well. Now, we have just added EQ, the most important effect of them all. So this is what you can see. Thank you for tuning in, Kimo's Set C. Okay, so look at this. That thing, that waveform, which is a really cool feature, is the sample on the audio spectrum. So down here is deep bassy subtones, your kicks, your bass lines, your belly grumbles when you haven't eaten for a week, you know, because Centrelink isn't enough. Up here is the high end, the very piercing, you know, just loud, tinny, you know, high sounds, and everything in between. So, the sample that we're playing, I'm going to solo it, which is a fun little feature I've shown you about. We've got a lot of information down this low end. We do not need it. So, these little things are warp markers for the EQ. And as I play with it, you can hear it sounds different. I'm boosting different frequencies. So what this is, it's boosting and removing different frequencies. So I'm just going to click 1 and I'm going to change the warp style to cut off all of this unwanted, noisy bottom end stuff. So to do that, just click here. Just going to click this little drop down menu, which is number 1, as you can see. 1, 2, 3, 4. They're all labeled. So 1, going to click this drop down menu, going to hit this, which essentially just cuts off. It's good for the low end and the top end. So you can, you know, sculpt and find the frequency that you want. So we don't want that bassy stuff because that sample, it really doesn't need that bass, as you can hear, to be present. So I'm going to do the same on the other end of the EQ band. I'm going to go 4, click the drop down, and do this same little drop off. Cool. So that sounds cool. What does 1, 2, 3 stand for? They're just the warp markers on the frequency spectrum. So they don't really mean anything. I guess it's just a reference so you can adjust down here the type. Yeah, so this is sounding a bit better. One way to figure out how it sounds compared to the original is this little thing up the top left, which is, you'll also notice it's here. Just turns effects devices off and on. So let's try it. I'll turn it up a bit. Let's try it with the EQ and without. There we go. That's a bit more obvious. I'll just do that. There we go. You can hear the lower end. And so experiment with that and get a sound that you like. But for instance, let's try cool drums. I'll just press stop and start. I'll unsolo it. And I'm going to stop this breakbeat thing. Cool. So I'm going to double click cool drums. I'm going to click and drag a little EQ8 onto the end. You can see there's a lot of fun information down the bottom here and a bit up here too. The clicky sound is about there. So I'm going to do the same thing. Alright, cut off the top end because I want the other sample to pop out there. And yeah, just going to play around with that. I'm going to hit number 1 and I'm just going to do a little drop off like I did before, because the frequencies right down the end are so deep that you're probably only going to hear them on a big club sound system that has subwoofers. So, and often this little edge here, you know, it can produce unwanted bass. If you really want your kick and your bass line to pop through, it's almost better to just cut off a little bit, really down low there. Okay, so that's EQ. You need to play around with that to really understand it. Play around with the samples, see what you can isolate. With a breakbeat, it's probably going to be very obvious because it's a lot of range in there. Now I've got 15 minutes, so alright, you can hear. See, if you really push things, you can give it a different character. Yeah. I recommend you play around with EQ8 for the rest of your life. Okay. Now I've only got 15 minutes left. I wanted to get into automation, but instead I'm going to get into some effects. Okay, so by default, actually, is everyone doing okay? Awesome. EQ is the best. Samplers, simplers, drum racks, also really good. It might seem like, oh, I just want to start making this song. I just want to get into it. You've really got to learn this stuff. You've really got to, you know, play around with EQ. Like, I remember I went to art school in 2013 and we had a sound art class and they were like, play around with EQ. I'm like, oh, why do I even need to bother? But it's really important. EQ is the best. Different sounds react differently. It's so, it's just like a really basic thing. If you're a DJ, you've got high, mid and low. That is like, yeah, EQ on vocals for sure, absolutely. Everything, every sample you've got, you might just want to tweak it a bit. You know, if you imagine a DJ mixer has something that's a bit more like this. Low, mid, high. So I'm just going to delete that. If you imagine that's like high is the top, mid is the middle, and low is the bottom. So now you have this crazy way that you can change sound like never before on a DJ mixer. Also helps you understand music that you're listening to a bit more, listen to your favorite tracks, hear how they're EQ'd, and it'll be good for working out what you want. Some people play around different styles that might not be conventional, adding a lot of the top end if there's noise for texture, whatever. Okay, so sad to be running out of time, but I'm going to leave you with something really fun. So these things here are called sends. So what they're doing is they're sending your audio signal. I'm just going to hit stop. They're going to send your audio signal over here to these things, which are called sends. And the sends have effects on them. Now, these outside of the EQ and, your levels, which you know about, the volume here, these are the next two most important effects. So, to add reverb or delay, you just play your sample. There we go. We're going to send it to A by clicking and dragging and lifting up, moving up. Now that's reverb, is essentially making the sample sound like it's in a room. It gives the sample space in a mix. So if I play the breakbeat, you can hear they're occupying different zones, you could say. So pull out reverb, dry. Let's add the reverb to the drum break. So it actually, in a way, it beefs up the sound as well, because it's essentially repeating it multiple times to create a feel like it's in a room that's reverberant, that's, echoing the sound. Like in a tunnel, when you scream and it just goes down the tunnel, that's a type of reverb. So let's try delay. As you can hear, it's just repeating the sound and slowly fading out. Now, delay is cool, but I'll just go through this really quickly. This is a left and right delay, so it's ping-pong. It's delaying on, the left and right channel. You'll be able to hear it in your earphones. They do, yes. So Jords, they are playing the original sound. I'm going to get into this. I'm going to get into this later, but just to show you, what you can do is bring this level down. So when you use a send, you're hearing the original, but we'll get into this next week. If you go pre-fader, you can send it without hearing the original. And then I'm going to turn that off. Cool. I'm going to get into that later. But yeah, that's a really cool one. Pre-fader and post-fader. So that means pre-fader, you're sending it before the fader's up. It's very useful. We'll get into that later. Okay, so the delay is timed, yes, by the BPM. You'll also see, so Ableton's effects are very good for sticking in with timing. So at the moment, I'll just send B. So that's just one. So it's left and right. At the moment, it's left and right. They're synced. You want to click that. They're going to be different delays. So you'll hear on your headphones that the delay is going different timing. It's on sync. So sync means that it's syncing to the BPM of your track. You can get some really nice, so now you've got EQ, reverb and delay, and all of a sudden there's just so much going on. No problem. Okay, so another thing, dry and wet. That's just how much of the original signal you're hearing. So if it's dry, nothing is coming through. If it's wet, it's only the delay. Feedback is how many times the delay is happening as it fades out. So if I just put that up, it's just going to keep repeating. So you've probably seen a delay pedal before, or a delay or echo on a DJ mixer. It's a similar thing. Alright, we've got 5 minutes left. So just going into the reverb, which is this channel, dry and wet. There are lots of things going on here, but for now, just know you got decay time. That's how long that's the same as the what was it called in here? So the feedback. So decay time is like a feedback for the reverb. It goes up to 60 seconds. So I'll put some on this. You always have the original sound is almost lost to this like drone. It becomes a drone, so you can turn drum sounds into drones. Now, so these sends are really great for trying out things through reverb and delay. You can just add a reverb or a delay or any of these effects in the audio effects section to your sound. So if you want to add a reverb to this, you want some very specific parameters for one sound, just click, drag it on to your individual channel. So yeah, we've got that. Now, the cool thing about this is, let's delete that. These sends are not limited to, I've got 4 minutes. They're not limited to one effect. So, say I'll go and get the delay again. There's now a delay and a reverb on one send. So it's taking the reverb sound, and it's giving it a delay as well. So just quickly, it's the chain. The way that it works is it goes from left to right. So whatever's coming in on the left, that happens first, and everything else follows. So you're having a sound that's reverberated going into a delay. The reverberated sound is delaying. Alright, we've got 3 minutes left. I felt like we covered quite a lot, but maybe not enough at the same time. I really appreciate all of your support, and if you can, just scroll below the video screen. There's a PayPal donation button. I really appreciate if you could pop me a couple of dollars. That would be great. If not, that's fine. It's been a really fun session. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them now. We don't have to end right at 8. But yeah, so just quickly going over everything again. We played around with the Instruments tab in the browser window. We used Drum Rack, Simpler, and Sampler. We used the Drum Rack to load in samples, modify them, modify the way they sound, etc. We used the simpler with the slice mode, and that cut the sample into pieces. The tricky thing about that was that the samples start at C1. A bit awkward, but yeah. And then we used the sampler to play a sample and change the pitch of it. And so after that, we got into EQ, which is sculpting the sound. And yeah, so we've got sculpting, and then we used, with the simpler sampler, can you make it so the keys only change pitch but not the sample length? Let me just, keys only change pitch. You can, I'll get you maybe your email address or something, and we can have this conversation because I've just got a minute left. So I've got the effects. The last thing was the effect sends, and the sends send over to here. This is our effects. They can be in a chain or by themselves. This button turns it on and off. Remember, dry and wet is only the reverb, dry is only the dry signal. Decay time is how long it goes for the delay. Feedback is how long it goes for dry and wet. And you've got these, which can be synced or not. And this is the timing of the delay. Cool. Thank you all so much for today's session. We'll be back next week. I really wanted to get into arrangement view, but we kind of ran out of time. So next week, we're just going to start straight onto arrangement view and get into some automation and other fun things. I might put together another sample pack. Yeah, thank you all so much. Just click that little PayPal donations button if you want to. I appreciate if you could send me a few bucks, and as always, send me an email or anything you want. Join the Facebook group. I'm going to put some interesting articles and tutorial videos to watch. Thank you everyone so much. Thanks George, Flat Surface, Penny, Crunchy, Lucy, Emma, Chintan. Thank you all so much. Kate, you're all great. I'm glad. Thanks, Mel. I'm glad you're all getting so much out of this. It's really exciting. Definitely put a donk on it next week. Rainbow Rhythms. All right. Much love. See you next week. I might be doing a few other streams through the week. I just got a really cool game / music making program for my Nintendo Switch called Core Gadget. I'm going to play around with that, I reckon. Make some tracks. Yeah. We'll continue the Ableton sessions next week. Play around with your EQs, your drum racks, your effects. Go crazy. Enjoy. Thank you so much.